All right. Guys, welcome to Headspace Live. We go every Wednesday, we go live with some talking points, and we're completely unedited, uncut. Um, you get what you get. Hopefully, you get some value out of this. Usually, there are fun conversations that go and sometimes on tangents and circles and things like that. Today, we're talking about meaningful work, the importance of it. How do you make meaningful work that pays? How do you accelerate progress? How to break limiting beliefs, things like that. So these are sort of the general categories of things we're going to be discussing. But I hope you're tuning in. If you are, please just leave us your comments. You can do it live. You can do it afterwards. We'll try to respond to all of them. Here we go. All right, we're back. Brandon Nicely's in the house.
Hey, what's up, everybody?
All right, good. So today, without further ado, I'm gonna start with just get right into it, okay?
Come on, man.
And so the first thing I wanted to talk to you about is how do you do meaningful work that pays? So that's the caveat, right? Now,
You got to
and
get paid, huh?
yeah, you got to get paid, right? And I think the reason I wanted to bring that one up is a couple of reasons actually. The first one is this: in one of the most extensive studies, the Harvard study of human development that I love quoting over and over again. It's sort of at the core of my exponential radar. Sort of the 7 things that we discussed that are the most heavily weighted um, dimensions of human life. Right at the top of the list is basically doing meaningful work. Right, it's probably number 4, something along those lines. And the reason I really believe that is true. And I really believe that many people, if not most, I would say maybe the majority, treat work not as a calling, not something that has a lot of meaning, but really as a source of income purely, and that's it, right? So it's just a job. That's why the work, the job sort of title is just a job. And people roll their eyes and thank God it's Friday, and all of those things derive from it. I think it's unhealthy, honestly. Now, I don't want to romanticize calling and passion and things like that. On the other hand, um, I just really feel like passion, calling, being aligned with what you're supposed to be doing on this earth is super important, right? So therefore, the question is sort of twofold, two-dimensional, right? The tension between, okay, it pays the bill and is meaningful to me. So I have a few thoughts about that, but I wanted to sort of ask you what you think.
Well, I mean, I think it's all sort of it's on a scale, right?
In a
At some
scale, yeah.
level. I mean, because
Yeah.
you think about it, we could be slaves. Many people have been slaves around the world over the centuries, where they had no choice whatsoever in what they did. Right? They were
Yeah.
owned by somebody else. And so, if you go slightly up the scale, we have modern day employment.
Yeah.
Which
Slightly,
is
just slightly at its scale.
just slightly up the scale, depending on it. You might be digging ditches, or you might just be in a job that it's very rote, very regular, sort of
Mm-hmm.
not a lot of new challenges, for example, or stimulation. And
Yeah.
sometimes that's okay. Like, you just have to get the job done and get paid, right?
Yeah.
And you keep going up the scale to where maybe it's something that you actually enjoy to do, and maybe you enjoy the people that you're with, but it's not really inspiring, right? Then there's all the way at the top is sort of this. I think what you're targeting is this idea that we can do meaningful work that is also provides a sense of joy, right?
Mm-hmm.
That you enjoy actually, and ideally you enjoy the people that you work with,
Yeah.
and then that's like the trifecta.
It is. Yeah.
And then I think there's also this aspect: is it really what you do well? And I think that over time, I don't know about you, but it's sort of like you sort of iterate and you find your way. But I don't know
Yeah.
that anybody that's been really that good at just targeting it early in their career
No, I don't think so
without
either.
without a good bit of iteration, right?
But
So
I
from
would say that historically, right, for 5,000
I
years.
mean, you might be an anomaly. You were actually one of the guys early in your career. You did
That's
exactly what
true.
you
I
wanted
did,
to
yeah.
do.
But I'm
Yeah.
just weird, right? So I understand, and
Yeah.
I guess that's sort of my point is I want to bridge between the weird and see if we can reverse engineer it into okay that anybody can do this and this and this without being as weird as I am, right? So, for 5,000 years, most of human history, you didn't really have a choice. You would go into your father's profession, for example, right? You had a caste system. Like if you were born a peasant in medieval Europe, you would most likely stay a peasant in medieval Europe, unless you went into priesthood or the military or whatever. Like the choices were actually quite limited. Now we live in the most amazing time in human history where anybody can do pretty much almost anything that has a demand that has a demand globally. So so to me, it's just a beautiful time to be alive. And yet some of the limiting sort of beliefs, some of the fears, they're still there. And so I just don't think there's any good reason in modern times, in 2024, for someone to not do meaningful work and actually get paid for it quite well. So that's sort of my premise. That's my framework. I am definitely an outlier because I think I was just early. I mean, I've actually not done a job that I wasn't inspired and loved doing since I was like, I don't know, 22 maybe. Now, it doesn't mean that every job that I do doesn't have bad days. Like there's a lot of bad days, especially if you pursue passion and entrepreneurship and you want to start your own thing. You bleed like every day. That's not the point. There's a lot of hardship involved in pursuing meaning in work. Um, but I do think that almost anybody can do this. It's just you have to sort of understand what the cost is, what the framework is, what the steps are. So I wanted to see if we can unpack some of the stuff with you.
Okay. Well, I think again, like you and I at times have contrasts of background and
Mm-hmm.
places of origin, for example.
Right.
I was not I was slightly above slave labor for most of my life
Were you?
until I became, mid 21. I mean, I was until well, actually 18, I would say. I was raised in a family where my father was very much old school, and he tended to do everything. He built his own house, he cleared his own, properties, and I didn't have a choice really. I was working, many hours a day, and I can remember busting concrete for 25 cents an hour and swinging a sledgehammer and lifting concrete and wheelbarrowing it out of the way and then
Yeah.
pouring I mean, just it was it was sort of work that I wouldn't have chosen to do.
Right.
But it's interesting that what really is an irony that I think, I mean, I'll just throw this out, but it occurs to me in this conversation is the amount of freedom that we have. It's like the dimensions of freedom that we have currently
Yes.
versus the restrictions, and the historical, I mean, comparison, I think is really interesting because everything from, I'm watching this show called Kurulus, which is, I get into these Turkish sort of history of the Ottoman Empire, and I really enjoy the history, and you get to see the drama, and you get to see, sort of the Islamic faith and how they raise children, and it's interesting that this one daughter who's beautiful and she has a choice of sort of husbands, but the father, who's kind of the tribal leader, wants her to be married to this particular bey who's a bigwig. He kind of has the right hand ear of the sheikh, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so he's kind of a player. He has his own mansion, and so it's all about. It just occurs to me that most of your life, I think most of the history of the world, people were assigned who they'd be married to, and there was very
Yeah,
little choice,
absolutely.
very
Yeah.
little choice. And then we've gone from that choice in who we marry, which we do have today, to now we're talking about choice at work and choice of how we live, how and where we live. Oftentimes you had no choice as to where you were going to live. You would live and die within about 70 miles of where you were born, right? And so it's just amazing the dimensions of freedom that we have. You almost have to put it in context to provide some perspective. And what's really interesting to me is we have all this freedom, and yet we're not happy.
Right.
If that makes sense. Like there's all this freedom, and yet the question is how good are we at navigating that freedom?
Mm-hmm.
That makes sense. Like now you can date anybody you want, you can marry anybody you want, and how well are we doing in that dimension?
Yeah.
We can choose our career, we can choose the meaningful work that we do, but how good are we doing in that dimension? Like I think what's interesting is I think sometimes people were happier when the choice was taken away. They just knew what they needed to do
Well,
from
I think,
point A
yeah, yeah.
from point A to point
I
D.
think
And
choices can be actually really, bring suffering into your life if you have too
it
many
does,
choices.
because then because it's this issue of what you choose. What was the alternative that I'm missing out on? So
Yeah.
there's all of this sort of like like this mental, I think,
Yeah.
gyration around, are we optimizing our living? And you see this today in today's generation. We've never had a more self-entertained, you
Yeah.
know, sort of generation that has free time on their hands, has
Yeah.
all this self-entertainment, a device that entertains them 7 by 24, and and yet I would say accomplishes very little in terms of traditional work, if you will, or accomplish a production, if you will, of
Mm-hmm.
economic production. Um, and oftentimes they're very depressed and don't have a sense of identity, so it's really an interesting conversation as it relates to, you know, is freedom good for us? and and
Yeah.
then when we do have freedom, how do we navigate that freedom?
Well, talking about freedom, it's fascinating. I was coming of age to go into a professional sort of dimension. Um, we were living in the Soviet Union at the time, and it fell apart, right? So my first professional life was, I was just lucky enough to be in freedom. But literally 2 years before I had to go into the professional realm, there was not a lot of freedom. And you live in the Soviet Union. There are all kinds of restrictions. Lack of freedom is sort of the name of the game, and everything is owned by the government, and private enterprise is not encouraged or illegal, actually, and all of those things, right? All of those layers. So I think maybe part of my DNA of, hey, I really want to live out my passion, maybe coincides with this sort of sudden fall of the Iron Curtain, and there's this free market and possibilities everywhere, and I just went into it and jumped into it, and I think that's perhaps why, because I got an early taste of success of pursuing passion that actually panned out, that gave me this sort of DNA that I never stopped. I do think that it can be reverse engineered for anybody today. And the reason I believe in passion and calling is because if you're passionate about something, you will work harder, you will endure more hardships and rejection. You are okay with sucking at the thing that you're doing for much longer without giving up and iterating, iterating, iterating. So it's just an embedded sort of fuel, I think, in because then you, ironically, although it's made feel like it's passion, it's self-centered. It's not, in the sense that you really want to do something well. You're going to be you want to be the best at something, and you will absolutely not be the best for an extended period of time, and you don't give up, and then you become better and better and better, and you sort of join the top 20%, top 10%, top 5, 10, top 1. And that was sort of, I really believe that. So in every new
Huh.
thing that I do, I usually suck, and but I'm really excited about it, and I don't give up, and I usually suck less, and then I become good at it, essentially. So these cycles have been over and over again. I've had essentially 5 careers in my lifetime, but that's the cycle that repeats itself. The other side is, what's the sweet spot between impact and income, right? Where you can say, okay, how am I going to get paid? How am I going to pay the bills? And that's where I think the shift from self, I feel like this is what I'm supposed to be doing, I think I'm good at this, has to shift to the marketplace, where you go, okay, how do I find out what people need exactly? What problems do I solve? How do I learn those problems, and how do I solve those problems in a way that attracts people to me solving those problems for them, right?
Again, you're talking about dimensions of freedom that I think it took me a long time to actually get to, because I was just good at math and science, and so I went to engineering. I went to school first. First got to go to college in my family, so that was a new experience. And I just kind of took the next step and navigated, and I had opportunities to. um, I think, for example, I had an opportunity to be what I really loved was physics, and I was fascinated by physics, how things worked,
Yeah.
and had an opportunity to be. I was one of the top students, and I was invited to be under
Right.
this famous professor, his as one of his grad students, and I turned it down
You did.
because I felt the need to make money,
But
right? And I think that's really interesting where we come from and how we
you
learn.
liked it, didn't you? Did you like doing what you were doing as an engineer? Not so much,
Yeah,
really.
yeah. I mean, I was good at it. And that's what I'm going to draw. Just trying to draw this distinction between what I'm good at
Yeah, yeah.
and necessarily what I enjoyed
And you
doing.
don't think there's a connection between what you're good at and passion?
I think there can be. Yeah, I think there
Really?
can be. For example, there's an amount of suck in every job.
Right.
For example, I'm traveling. So I leave, I say no to this professor, and I go and I get a job at one of the first fiber optic companies in the country that was
Yeah.
installing fiber optics all over the country. So for 6 out of 7 days, I traveled all around the country with optical time domain reflectometer, these big steel case machines, and a fusion splicer, and all these. I had like about 5 different major, like 2 foot by 2 foot or bigger steel cases, that very expensive equipment. And you know what it's like to travel. Imagine traveling with all this junk,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, yeah. Not
six
fun.
days a week, and it was brutal. And I was sitting there talking, lecturing on fiber optic technology to a bunch of guys smoking like fiends in the room. I mean, it was. I mean, there was a fair amount of suck in that job, but yes, do I like it? And I was really good at teaching, I think, and I was pretty good. I understood the technology, and I understood, and I was like good at building these projects. So I guess I say that just to say that there was a good fair amount of suck in that job, and I decided to leave pretty
Hmm.
quickly and moved on to IBM, where there was bigger, like more
Yeah.
diverse opportunities. But even in that, I had to, so to me, I think there was, especially in technical fields where you have to develop yourself, understand, the information. There's a fair amount of hurdles that you have to get over, and so. But did I enjoy it? Yeah, I did. I mean, it wasn't like I was, pain. I felt pain going to work every day. I actually enjoyed the
Yeah.
people, and I enjoyed the work, and I enjoyed learning. Um, so I think, I wasn't until I've become older that where I started to consider, where should I spend my next efforts, right?
How
Usually
old
it's,
were you when you
well,
started thinking that?
honestly, I would say it's probably, I mean, I was an entrepreneur early on, and I built, but even in the gig that I co-founded early on that went to the moon, it was a big gig. It took a lot of my energy. It was something that was presented to me, an opportunity
So
that was
you fell
presented.
into it,
It
basically. Is that
wasn't
what you're
like
saying?
it wasn't like I sat around and thought about what was next.
Yeah.
I didn't start doing that till, probably in my late 40s, mid 40s.
Wow.
And so when you have a little more, flexibility, and or you've done enough things where for me, what I needed was a pause. There
Hmm.
was some shift in life that caused me
Right.
it was a wake up call. All right,
Yeah,
what
yeah.
is it that are enjoying, not enjoying? You have some freedom. Usually have a little bit of money in the bank. You can at least, you don't have to worry about paying the rent.
Yeah.
Um, and that's when I had, this, but again, it was usually relational fabrics, discussing with people,
Hmm.
uh, what's going on. Like I was always in action, trying to stay ahead of what's coming.
So I guess
But
then
yeah,
basically some of it is just you were uh I mean, so maybe that's actually a really good discussion, because for me, I come from this sort of lack of freedom. There's sudden freedom. I invest my passion. It works out. I just keep rinse and repeat, right? So maybe I just fell into it. I just maybe fell into freedom, right? And then you went another route. You followed sort of your strengths and opportunities, and then maybe by age 40-ish, you start now making conscious choices and designing a future with much more intentionality. Is that accurate?
Yeah, but ironically, probably the thing that I did that I enjoyed the most was when I was building. I didn't the thing that I fell into, I was really good at.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I think exceptional, in
Mm-hmm.
terms of any measurement. Um, and I just through, I would say, trial and error, I discovered my
Mm-hmm.
strengths and then also my passions.
Mm-hmm.
What I really enjoyed doing. I was thriving, like I was thriving in my 30s,
Mm.
and in terms of professionally. But I don't think I could have, like you. I don't think I could have sat back and actually, kind of created that
Yeah,
path.
yeah, yeah.
It was more
Imagined
of
it.
it was
Yeah.
a path of discovery,
Interesting.
um, and an opportunity. Well, for example, I made a choice to move from West Virginia to North Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
That changes your life, and then from North Carolina to New York City. I mean, that changes your life. So you're making these choices, right? That were actually typically not professional choices. They were just choices by, usually, spiritual choices, who I wanted to be with, where I wanted to be, the communities that I wanted to be a part of. And then, the job was just sort of secondary.
But
But I think,
let's
yeah,
reverse engineer this a little bit, because I think we bumped into something interesting. Like, I just have sort of a background that I think I had more propensity because of nurture, I guess, and backstory to
mhm,
do this, right? You had more propensity to do that. But there's certain commonalities that I think are still, you can reverse engineer and actually produce them. For example, and I'll give you an example. For you, it was moving to New York City. You change your environment.
mhm.
When you are around people that will literally look you up and down, like that lady you told me that story, and go, yeah, we're gonna get you a new wardrobe, a new suitcase. We need a do over here, when you're in an environment like that, whatever version of that is, when it comes to the way you think, the opportunities, how people just imagine the future or even the possibilities, that's a big deal, right? And yeah, maybe you didn't design it, but you did change your environment. So reverse engineering that, I would probably say, hey, if you want to accelerate progress, which is actually a great segue into the second thing I wanted to talk about, right? How do you get a direction and accelerate? To me, environment, number one, right? Find yourself with people who are up to stuff and start thinking because it just rubs off, right? You're in one environment where people don't think about the thing that you aspire to or interested in, and you go, yeah, that's probably not my fate to be whatever, right? You plant yourself in a different environment, like New York City, Wall Street. Okay, everything changes. I don't care who you are. I don't care how you came to that. You're going to be pulled by the tide, by the vortex, right? You're going to be elevated, or you'll be spit out, which is also an option. But I feel like you can engineer that, right? You can design that. You can say, hey, who do I want to be around? Like early on when I before I even started my very first career, which was music, I had nothing to show for it, and I would schmooze myself into after parties where artists would hang out, but I had no recordings, no demonstrable sort of artistic abilities, and I would just hang out with them, right? And I would sort of make myself look like one, you know, and but it was really cool because even sort of psychologically, possibilities in my own mind expanded just by being in that environment. I was like, oh, look at there's the record executives or musicians or
Mhm.
dancers and rappers, and oh, they're normal people. They're not gods.
Mhm.
They're also can be actually foolish and drunk, which means they're probably not smarter than me, maybe not that much smarter than me. And, like all these things, when you put yourself in certain situations, I think I heard a quote, you know, was it Bill Gates or Steve Jobs? Were like, look, the world is changed by people that are not smarter than you, you know? which I think it's true if you think about it, right? But we sort of idealize people, these heroes in whatever business creativity, and then but they're human, right? They also make all these mistakes, and they lose their temper, and they sucked at some point as well. So we're seeing them at their peak. But if we put ourselves in environments where we can see the journey there, the steps there, maybe that's a thing you can think of, as a young professional.
I think that's right. I think context is key. Like the pond you swim in
Yeah, exactly. Right.
is everything.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're swimming with the minnows, you're not going to become a whale. It just doesn't
Mm-hmm.
work, right? I mean,
Yeah. Yeah.
so I think that's interesting to. I think that's the one thing that I did do well was to. Let me back up. I think I came from a lack mentality,
Mm.
right? To me, it was survival.
Yeah.
the first the first 10 years, I was always looking behind me to see if somebody was going to take my food. I mean, it was that sort of mentality. Like I was, so I was hunting and pecking and doing everything. I had a strong work ethic thanks to my father. Um, but to your point, I told you, I think I've mentioned this story before. Here I am in the plant, and I come to IBM. I'm in Charlotte, North Carolina, and it's a fantastic plant. I mean, everything. I mean, pellets come in one side, and IBM Pro printers come out the other end, and no humans have even touched them. It's all robots, and this is
Wow.
in mid '80s, right? And it's completely automated. Really interesting as a mechanical engineer to be doing all this robotic engineering. Very
Yes.
cool job, right? I mean, you couldn't find a better job for a mechanical engineer. And I have lunch with this guy who's been at IBM for 30 years, and he has this big brown tie. I kid you, it was 8 inches wide at its width at the bottom. It was brown, and it had a yellow pineapple, and it had about 30 years of lunch stains. Just dribble from
Yeah.
sandwiches or the soup, whatever the cafeteria was serving that day. And I knew that I didn't belong there.
Ah,
Like
interesting.
I couldn't see myself being challenged, or being in this same place for 30 years. So I started to
Mm.
think about New York City when an opportunity came along, and I was like, my boss even said, "You don't want to go there. Those people walk on water. You don't want to." Like
Oh.
they were frightened by the idea
Yeah. Yeah.
of IBM sales and marketing
Mm-hmm.
field people, because they had a pretty strong reputation. And then imagine at New York, at the top of the top is the IBM Wall Street branch office that was the best of the best, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so to me, that enthused me, even though I had a survival mentality. It didn't. I think the enthusiasm for a challenge and something new that was kind of
Yeah.
very different, and that I think that was the inspiration. That was like, I guess I wasn't afraid of challenges. And I think that gets to your, I mean, for you to be able to reverse engineer this, you've got to take risk, right? Consider, the pond that you're swimming in. And if you're not if you're not with the people that you want to be with, or you don't envision yourself there naturally, then, change your pond. And
Change your
that may,
pond. Yeah.
yeah, that can be very, I mean, there's a lot of exposure.
It is.
I
Yeah.
went there as a country boy. And most of the guys that I worked with were from Harvard and Columbia and Princeton and all these, kind of folks that IBM hired. And there was me from West Virginia University, but I could compete with as just as well, like to your point, as any of them. But you had to be in that environment for me to even know that I could compete, if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah. But I think also, and yeah, and I think it's like taking that step into the unknown. But I think humility is really key here, because if you know you're gonna suck, you can either self protect and be the big fish in a small pond, or you can jump and become the small fish in a big pond. And to me, I've always wanted that. I've always wanted to be the small fish, because then I can become bigger fish in that big pond, and but it's scary. But you know what I realize is that every time you do that, if you reach up and you start hanging out with people that are just extremely gifted, talented, more well-rounded than you are, more informed, more wise, more savvy, you understand also this other thing, because you because when you overcome that fear and insecurity, is that no one knows what they're doing, actually. Everybody makes it up as they go. Only some people just do the thing. And that's how they become these people that others idealize, right? But in the beginning, no one knows what they're doing. Everybody's making up as they go. So once you like remove that almost like a veil, right? You become much more comfortable, I think. And the other thing that I've learned, and I try to teach actually in exponential, is this style of learning that I learned early on, and it sort of transferred without me really being conscious of it, that I call now immersive learning, right? So when you move like 4 countries by the age of 7, you become this sponge just for the sake of survival. So I sort of reverse engineered it, and I practice it now, although I haven't moved in 12 years, for example. I live in Austin, Texas, same place. But immersive learning is sort of the same way you learn a language as a young person if you move somewhere, right? So if somebody goes, you learn a language in high school, you usually don't know the language by the time you're 20, 21. But if you move to a new country, even for a few months, you don't forget that language. And it's the difference of learning that makes that solidifies that skill
Mm-hmm.
that you cannot learn. And sort of my theory is that if it's daily, so you have to learn something daily, even if it's 18 minutes. I think there's studies that show 18 minutes a day will get you mastery in about a year of almost anything, right? A day, 18 minutes a day. It's not a lot of time, but it's consistency. But people dabble too much. So daily, experimental, which means you implement every day. You try to do something with it and you suck a lot. So
Mm-hmm.
experimental. And the third one is interactive. Is you are with other people where you say, hey, how about this? How about that? And you sort of teach. So that's why we have cohorts at Exponential, right? It's interactive. It's interactive. It's not just one-on-one. So that's how when you move to a country, you are surrounded by this language daily. You try to say things, and at first you don't even understand anything. You just say a few words. Slowly you get to a little bit more of a fluency through experimentation, and you do it with other people. So if you do those 3 things, you will accelerate your progress, I believe. And that's
That's
why you
good.
being in New
Yeah.
York, you're hanging out with all these people, right? That walk on water. Then eventually you go, you know what? Actually, A, they don't walk on water. B, maybe they don't know what they're doing as much as I thought they were. And C, actually I can after 6 months I can keep up with them a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And then after maybe a year, I can actually, hey, I'm one of you, right?
Mm-hmm.
And after 2, 3 years, I'm hiring some of you guys to be under me,
Mm-hmm.
that kind of thing. Don't you think
Yeah.
that's accurate?
It is. I mean, it is absolutely, and that's the process. You have to be. I think one thing that occurs to me is that you and I probably had courage at some level for
Yeah,
whatever reason.
yeah,
Like you have to have enough courage to, change. I mean, one to even show up in the midst of another country. I can't imagine changing countries, right? As a
yeah.
kid, multiple times.
It's scary. Yeah,
I mean, it is. You have to have courage to do the things that are not.
yeah,
There's no
yeah,
normal for you. There's the normal. Sort of boundaries are sort of not
yeah.
not well
My dad,
described.
my dad tells me when I moved for the fourth time, I was so utterly confused because I spoke like Russian and Spanish at birth, and then I had to learn Portuguese in this new country called Mozambique. So when I moved to Mozambique, he said you were quiet for a year. Like in social settings, I would just not say things.
Hmm.
So my theory is that I was paralyzed I was just so disoriented. He's like I couldn't get you to speak in like even with friends. So it is pretty intense stuff, right? For a kid.
I can't imagine that. I think trauma does develop character, though. I know, for
Yeah.
example, when my mother died when I was young, and there was no supervision. I was basically by myself, so I had all this time
Wow.
to
Yeah.
to be completely, to get myself in all kinds of trouble.
Yeah. Hmm.
And I had that same, sort of. I had to go through a period of determining, how I wanted to roll, essentially, right? And
Yeah.
so anyway, but I never had the fear gene, I guess, at some level. I just didn't, for me,
Hmm.
I was kept charging the front lines. But I think that also led to, so it led to discovery, which I think is good, right? So like you had, I mean, you had it's pretty amazing that you had the courage early on to go after something that's a very low probability
Yeah,
career,
yeah.
right?
Well, I think
I
part of it
mean,
is
I was all about probability. I had high probability. If I'm an engineer, I
yeah,
come out with a
yeah,
degree
yeah,
and I'm doing well, I'm going to get hired by somebody at a really pretty good salary. And then, I
yeah.
mean, then you go from there, right? That's your,
But I think it's I don't think it's courage. I think it's really more the origin story shapes how you think opportunity happens. In your origin story, you were smart, you went to college, you had a baseline, right? Of
Mhm.
yeah, high probability of success if I'm in this profession, etc. For me, if you start your life as a refugee and there's 100% uncertainty, I my theory is that if nothing is certain, anything is possible.
Mm.
That's sort of where I landed is with my child sort of logic, right? It's like, well, nothing is certain. Like I'd have no foundational thing to like stepping stone. So why not, right? It's like, so what's the worst that can happen, right? Nothing worse than already happened earlier, right? Yeah, like my mom and I would, moms worry, and when I was in the U.S. already, and I would start like a new business or something, and she was like, "Christian, why are you doing this? Why are you trying this new thing? And you don't know if it's gonna work, and you're gonna ruin your family." And I turned to her at one time, and then I started repeating that back to her. It's like, "Mom, tell me to answer one question." She goes, "What? Is this gonna be worse than the Soviet Union?" She was like, "Yeah, probably not." I said, "Well, there you go." So,
That's great. Well, I mean, that is absolutely true. I think part of, the, the part of saying yes to opportunity, right, when it shows up,
yeah.
requires courage, requires confidence. Um, and I would say there's another dimension of this, though, that I think I was always charging the front lines, if you will,
Hmm.
in battle. Thank God we didn't grow up in the middle of war zone, essentially. At least
Hmm.
I didn't.
Yeah.
I would have been the guy charging the front lines probably. But what's sad about sometimes I think I look back is I outran my relationships at times.
Did
That
you?
makes
Okay.
sense.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
because I went from one city and I left West Virginia. We're all great friends. I had a whole posse, right? North Carolina had a posse. Went to New York City, I kept sort of
Mm,
outrunning, and I had a lack of continuity
interesting.
of friends. And I think community, which we talk a lot about, right,
We do, yeah.
is how do you balance this idea of, you know,
Going somewhere, yeah.
yeah,
Leaving your pack basically and going,
yeah,
right?
going out on the to the into the unknown, on doing it safely, meaning
Yeah,
quote
yeah,
unquote safely. How do you build the relational constructs to maintain, some level of just general safety in terms of your life, of relational fabric, right?
hmm,
So that's one of the things I think I learned, and one of the reasons in selecting Austin, Texas, and there were like 6,000 nonprofits here. There's a lot of heart here. I knew there were people that I could actually connect with, and that
yeah,
would be good long-term relationships. And so, yeah, I think, I mean, living in Austin, I don't have the opportunity as much that I had in New York City, just from pure volume
yeah,
of deals and opportunities, et cetera. But the people that you hang with it. So I think in the balance, there's this sort of dimensional balance that I think you talk about this in your program. There's a need in these different dimensions that we measure life in, that you don't want to be heavily overweighted in one dimension
yeah.
to the, to
Exclusion.
and to the exclusion of the other dimension. And so that having a great life is a very multidimensional exercise. So it's really interesting to think about what is the career path that you can take, or what is it? How do you set yourself up to win? How do you reverse engineer, if you will, success, um, and also create the right bumpers, if you will, that are safe. There's
Yeah.
almost like a safety zone, if you will,
Well, I think there's a lot to be said that you can actually build a lot of
relationally.
safety into your
Yeah.
life, yeah, relationally. And yet at the same time, I look at your life and my life, and you mentioned courage. I think it's that courage gets only developed when there's lack of safety, when there's less protection, and
Hmm.
you just suffer. You, I think courage and resilience only happen when there's suffering. And in case in point, what you were saying, sort of this generational crisis that we see in the kids that are now sort of entering the workspace, that were essentially brought up in environments where they were overprotected, and like hovering parents, like people just like people will let the kids play out in the street,
Hmm.
and everything that followed. These overprotected kids are so weak. They just don't have the courage, they don't have the will, and they have a low capability to suffer. And
Hmm.
even that, I believe, and sort of I try to coach people in that as well, because I have clients who have some of that, is that you can actually reverse engineer that too. And the way I see it is that you can create suffering that is constructive, rather than expose yourself to suffering that's unnecessary and destructive and sort of uncontrollable. But by being an entrepreneur, you're creating constructive. By starting your own business, you're creating constructing suffering, because you're basically asking for suffering. You're asking for rejection. You're asking for struggle. You're asking, when you discover your weak spots and your blind spots, you start realizing that you're not all that, and you need other people or need to learn new skills. That is constructive suffering. And I think if you just embrace the suck for a bit, you can build an amazing life and actually develop some muscles that you were deprived from of by sort of this overprotected environments. And I think you grew up in sort of these wide expanses of West Virginia, where you were so completely unsupervised and did all kinds of stuff. That is a gift, actually.
Hmm.
Yeah, it hurts a little bit. There's some downsides to it that you can probably compensate with later, but I think your muscle of that fearlessness comes from that, personally.
Hmm.
You know.
Yeah, I think you're right. There's certainly a lot to be said about how you're raised. Um, I think that what's interesting, though, is over an arc of a life, if you didn't learn it as a youth, you'll have opportunities to learn it as you go. I think
Yeah,
that's what I've
exactly.
discovered. It's amazing how life has a way of throwing you
Yeah.
what you need, if you will, right?
Uh-huh. Yeah,
And so
yeah.
we just have to be able to embrace it. I think part of the challenge. I had an interesting conversation this week with a guy that I really like, and he was on this journey to have 50 coffees with people.
Oh, okay.
Have you heard about that? There's a guy like who
No.
just did this 50 coffee thing, and
I've
so
heard of
he
the
just
concept, but not
yeah.
who you're talking about. Yeah.
So he's just he's just in this journey to have 50 coffees in a certain number of days, right?
Yeah, yeah. Uh-huh.
And I thought I was really impressed by that, because at the end of the day, think about how many people you meet when you have 50 coffees.
Mm-hmm.
And you think about the action that it takes to actually make that happen and set it up, right? And
Yeah.
then the courage to ask somebody, okay, who do you know that I can have coffee with next, right? Like there's just this rhythm. And it reminds me of when you're doing product development, like this need to do sort of market, sort of
Yeah.
research.
Mm-hmm.
And I was thinking about this as a contrast to people that I know now that are looking for jobs, who spend all their time behind a computer looking, like posting 1,000 times their resume, right?
Yes. Yeah, yeah.
And so this relates in that it's the easy thing to do, is to sit behind your computer and post information thinking that you're actually making progress, right?
Yes.
In reality, it's the hard work of literally getting face to face relationally with people that you discover opportunity.
Yeah,
To
that's
me,
right.
that's
Mm-hmm.
the wisdom in the 50 coffees, is you're discovering every person that you meet, you learn something new. It's a new window into
Mm-hmm.
possibility, right?
Yeah.
And I think it was fascinating, because it was nice to see a contrast. um, and I was thinking about, I think it was his son that was doing it too. And it's amazing. Like, just think about the power of somebody
That's
who's
impressive.
a teenager. They're talking about trying to find a mentor. You just need to have access to people who have access to people.
Oh,
And it's
excellent.
just,
Absolutely. Yeah.
yeah. So I thought that was kind of both courageous. I think you have to have courage and action as a business person, right? I mean, if you want to accomplish things, you can sit around and think about it all day, but it's this action oriented
Mm-hmm.
approach. So I was pretty impressed by that.
that also helps you discover things about yourself, and I think that's sort of the biggest gain from that is, when you're posting 100 resumes, you're really not talking to people, you're talking to an algorithm.
Hmm.
But if you, instead of that, get 50 coffees, you're talking to people, and you will discover things about yourself, about them, etc.
Hmm.
So okay, so here's before we go to the third talking point that I sort of had planned for us, I wanted to put a plug in for our exponential score assessment that we developed,
Hmm.
which essentially gives you the main dimensions of life, and you can actually see your weaknesses and strengths, and it's a really good map to understanding where you are, and then because of that, knowing where you want to go. So I want to put a plug on that, and because I'm lazy, I now have a bumper for that. So I'm going to play the bumper, and we're going to move on. So check out the bumper that I just just geeked out on. Do you want to become more self-aware and clear about your goals? Try our free exponential score. In just 5 minutes, get a high-level picture of where you stand in key life dimensions. Get your personal life score at exponential.life/score. Wow, check that out. High tech.
Nice. I like it.
Yeah, so easy,
Yeah.
concise. I don't have to talk about it with a lot
Uh-huh.
of detail, but I plugged it in.
It's literally a
And
plug. It's
it
literally a
is
plug-in.
literally a plug. Yeah, literally a plug. Okay, so let's talk about the third talking point is how to break limiting beliefs. And I think we sort of touched upon this
Hmm.
quite a bit already. And I think the environment, I think that sort of applies there. If you're in the right environment, man, I don't know where I got this, but somebody said, I think maybe it was Scott Galloway, who said, the highest predictor of your levels of income is your zip code. And I thought, wow, that's a brilliant statement right there, right? If you're surrounded by a certain type of people who think a certain way, and
Hmm.
it'll predict where you are. You're sort of the average of the five closest relationships. There's all these sort of sayings and tropes and stuff like that. But I would say to break limiting beliefs, be around people who don't have the limiting beliefs that you do. And again, connecting to the 50 coffees, right? Same thing. Uh, and find, I think maybe deeper than that, the closest people that you do have, you have to be able, and almost no one does that part. You need to be able to say, hey, tell me about my weaknesses. Like, that's the greatest gift I feel that you can give yourself.
Hmm.
Um, and the reason I say that is because there's sort of this school of thinking, the strength based stuff, right? So focus on your strengths, focus on your strength. And I think there's a lot of truth in that. At the same time, and I think that really is about what you can do very specifically, practically. Like, let's say you are a visionary, focus on your strengths and don't try to do this other stuff. Yes, that's actually true. But there's a dimension of that where that's actually really harmful if you don't understand exactly what we're talking about here. Is that, for example, universally, you want to be able to be good relationally. I don't care what gifts you are, but you are. It's all about people. Success is about people. Or romantically, that was sort of my big thing. Like, I had no idea what the heck I was doing, when I was young, and I was like, I need to fix this. This is ridiculous, or it's just going to sink my life. Um, and what people do is because it's so painful to think about the stuff that you feel so inadequate about yourself. So you sort of start ignoring it, and God forbid you're successful, so you can actually outsource it and go, like, have assistants and yes people around you who never point these things out, that you're an idiot or a jerk or a tyrant or insensitive or low relational IQ, whatever. Then that weakness, because you're shielded from it by money, success, status, um, becomes a blind spot, and the blind spot is the worst. The blind spot is, I don't even know what I don't know, and yet I feel the pain, the consequences of the thing that I don't know in my life over and over again. I lose people, I lose co-founders, I lose money, all these things that come at you that are painful, and you don't even know where they're coming from. And I feel like that's the limiting belief, the core limiting belief, danger of a limiting belief of that is a blind spot. You have no idea where it's coming from. So having somebody in your life who is wise enough, mature enough, knows you well enough to say, hey, I trust you. I know you're a safe person for me, and I know you're better than me in some of these areas. Would you tell me, you know, what is wrong with me? I feel like I'm broken in this, or I don't even know where it's coming from, but I keep bumping into this one thing over and over again. What do you think about that? It's a long intro to the talking
Yeah,
point.
no, I think that just call them limits, whether they're beliefs or whether they're programmed
Mm-hmm.
ways of being. I don't know. I think there's programming, if you will, but there's limiting elements. We all have them, right? And to your point, they're blind spots. So if you thought, if you think you're good, just try to,
Yeah.
try to work on the things that are your weaknesses, right? I mean, we're limited, and ultimately, we don't even like those blind spots are just blind. You can't even really identify, like you say, you can't put your finger on it. There's something that keeps repeating, but you
Yeah.
just seem to put your finger on it.
Yeah.
The only way to address those things are to be in with other people, like to your point, but to be with other people who actually care enough to actually press in
Yeah.
and be there, right? Because most people know, like if you're working for a jerk, you know, everybody knows it
Yeah.
except for that person.
Yeah. Except for that person. Yeah.
But nobody cares enough to actually
Mm-hmm.
and say something, right? So
Yeah. It's terrible.
I think there's two postures. One is a position and a posture. You have to put yourself in a position with people that and then you have to ask, right? You have to be humble enough. You have to kind of get input, right, as to like give people the opportunity and the open door and ask, ask for help. And I think that's very few people that I know that do that, right? But
Mm-hmm.
those that actually are the best. It's usually the best of the best. Those are the ones who have made a practice of change, right? Being
Yeah.
being one thing that's consistent in life is change. But how great would it be if we were in the posture, we have the both posture and position of change. Then over time we find things that are not breaking free, not in years, I mean years and decades,
Mm-hmm.
not breaking free in days and weeks. And so then you actually have the opportunity for things to shift much more quickly.
Yeah.
It's amazing. I mean, I think that's one of the things that entrepreneurs, boy, it's like you don't have to be really good if you're just sitting on a couch all day. But if you're in a game that's highly competitive and it requires a high level of execution, then everything that's weak in you is going to come out.
Yeah.
I mean, so you put yourself in a posture, in a position where there's like the heat is turned up, right? And it's like that crucible, right? That the dross comes off when you
Yeah. The stakes are high.
yeah,
The
and it's like,
pressure's
I mean, you,
high.
you and I have been in some circumstances together, right, where you've both observed me and I've observed you, but it's just
Yeah.
particularly where those things come out. And I think the cool thing about it is that you need a safe space to be able to look in the mirror of another person, to
Mm-hmm.
give you that feedback without feeling like they're going to um, you know chastise you or punish you or whatever, or take advantage of you. And I think that's what's unique about and I think that's why I think you're doing with the work that you're doing now, is because you see the value
Yeah.
of people walking with people.
I do. And it's so interesting. The more you talk to, especially people that have a high level understanding, for example, like venture capitalists, right? They do everything at scale, right? So they invest in 50 companies or 25 companies or whatever. They see patterns, right, from the height of their view. And I had a conversation with a couple of VC guys, and I said, so they were asking about exponential, and I said, well, I feel like at least it's one of the top things why companies fail is people and dysfunction in teams. And I was trying to be, I think it's number four from what I remember. There's obviously more than one way of looking at it. So I said like number 4 or something, and they were like, "Yeah, it's number 1." You know, so from their perspective, it's like it's
It's
just
all about
people.
people.
It's all
Yeah.
about people, right? And and especially in the business world, especially in the startup world where youth is everything, and hence, so which comes with a lot of strengths, right? Hustle culture, quick iterations, high energy, high flexibility, and then with not enough wisdom, environments where people invite somebody who is wise to counterbalance it, or I think these are the companies that will do better. Like Chip Conley, who I interviewed on Headspace, he advised Airbnb, and he sort of now runs the Modern Elder Academy, specifically because of that, because of his experience. And these young guys from Airbnb, before they were even huge, they said, "We need wisdom, and you're going to be our modern elder." And but that was unheard of in
That's
Silicon
great.
Valley at the
Yeah.
time, you know. So I think that's that kind of thing where you invite wisdom, and you get somebody on your board, on your advisory board, or a coach or a mentor. It's huge. The
Hmm.
the cost of opportunity when you don't do that is can be in the millions, right? So the cost comparatively is actually quite minimal. I just had a conversation with a VC guy right before I got on this on this, a guy in Austin, and we discussed that, and he was like, "Yeah, that's true. I mean, the cost of opportunity is huge. The cost of a program for Exponential, for example, is very small compared to it, or just the cost of, look, the emotional labor of building a relation doesn't have to be in just money. Like to be around the person who is safe, you have to earn the trust, earn the attention, even in the first place, right? Invite somebody to be a modern elder and give them equity, for example, like Chip Conley got equity, etc. And the second thing that comes to mind is marry the right person, because that's like another that's a great hack, right? If you marry the right person,
Yeah.
and you can part ways with a co-founder or with a team member. It's much harder and more costly to part ways with a spouse. Therefore,
Yeah.
there you have to tolerate, dissatisfaction. So I would say marry somebody who is truthful, who has integrity, who is bold, who will not allow you to get away with things. And I have a big personality, and I'm honestly, a lot of my success is because of Deb. I just had the wisdom to marry a woman who will not take stuff from anybody, right? She's just she she's very, very, very loving, very patient, very, just an incredible wife, but she's also not this person who would just accumulate and then sort of have a crisis 10 years in after not saying anything and ask for a divorce. She's going to say it like it is to your face right away, basically. and
Great.
I mean, it's such a treasure for me, to be married to her.
Hmm.
Because any big personality, anyone who's a visionary, anyone who's dynamic, we get ourselves, we get away from ourselves, like the decisions we make, how we are with people. China in a bull shop, in a bull in a china shop is sort of what happens quite a bit with people like that. And if you have somebody you're married to who can train you to not do that, that's a big plus, right?
Absolutely. I mean, I think in today's modern world, we treat marriage maybe as disposable,
Yeah, agreed.
right? So it's just kind of like the dating, you just move on or date multiple people at the same time. And I
Hmm.
mean, so there's and we think that's good, right? Some people, at least.
Yeah.
And I think in the same way, I know many. I was just talking to some friends. I reconnected with some old friends back at IBM in the '80s that I worked with on Wall Street just last night, and I was listening to stories, right? But this guy had been married 30 some years, and it's amazing, right? He's just very thoughtful and a good guy. But
Hmm.
there's a bunch of guys who, they give everything they have to the tech gig that they're in. So the gig is everything, right?
Yeah.
And marriage is secondary.
Yeah.
And those are the guys that are most unhappy because the gigs come and go.
Hmm.
And for them, many times wives come and go. But the cost the human cost of going through marriage, divorce. Um, Both, to your point, you don't get the opportunity to grow from it because you're just basically, the expectation isn't long term, right?
Yeah,
Or at least the commitment isn't long term. It's sad, actually.
it
But I
is.
think that what's really, to your point, though, when you get it right, when you have somebody who's strong as a partner. Yeah, it's just like that we talked about earlier, the mirror. I mean, you have a 7 by 24
Yeah,
mirror, and you can't get away from it, which is sometimes not what we always want, but what we need, right?
exactly. And if you exclude, if divorce is not an option, which for me it's not an option, then you have to just deal, right? You have to just change. And
Mm-hmm.
on the other side of that, there's a lot of joy, a lot of freedom, a lot of growth.
Mm-hmm.
Those blind spots become weaknesses, and then the weaknesses maybe become less weaknesses, and then they become strengths
Mm-hmm.
over years. And it's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful, beautiful thing. So, all right. Well, we're running out of time. I'm going to run one more bumper, which is for the exponential program. I'm having fun with the bumpers, actually, so you can
Yeah,
say.
looks like you're okay.
Are you enjoying this podcast and ready to level up? Discover high performance coaching at Exponential. Visit exponential.life to book your free strategy call. You can tell us where you are, where you want to go. We'll give you free advice. And if it's a good fit, we'll tell you all the amazing results our clients are getting and all the details about Exponential. Are you enjoying this? Boom. I like it.
All right, look at that. No, I like it. That's good. You get to see your little office there. You got your whole stuff going on in the background. It's cool.
Yeah.
Well, a lot happened this week we didn't talk about, with
Yes.
assassination attempts and all kinds of craziness in this world.
Oh my
But
gosh.
I like where you anchored it. It's good. I mean, when people see progress, I mean, I think that's when we feel like we're progressing. I mean,
True.
we're happy. We're happy people, right? The
Mm-hmm.
time that I've been most miserable is when I feel like I'm not making progress, right?
Yeah.
And so you're talking about some key elements to that process. So it's good. All right.
Awesome. Well,
Until next
guys,
time.
till next time, guys. Every Wednesday, 1 p.m., we get together and we talk about all kinds of things, completely unedited and free flowing. If you want to sign up for updates every week, go to christianrayflores.com. You'll get something awesome every Sunday morning. Otherwise, subscribe to wherever you're listening or watching this in every Wednesday at 1 p.m. Unless we're traveling or on vacation, we're gonna bring up something interesting and chew on it, and hopefully it'll be valuable to you. So thanks again for joining us in Headspace.